Hello, everyone. Welcome. We'll get started here in a few minutes. We'll just give it to about 2 or 3 minutes after 12 to let everyone join, and we'll get started. Hello, everyone. Welcome. We'll get started here in about a minute. Still a few people joining, so thank you very much for joining us today. We'll get started in a couple minutes here. Okay, welcome everyone. Why don't we get started here? It looks like we've got almost everyone with us. Welcome to today's webinar, Take Better Photographs, hosted by Professional and Continuing Studies at MacEwan University. Very excited to have you join us. I'll start with a quick land acknowledgement statement here. We acknowledge that the land in which we gather in Treaty 6 territory is a traditional gathering place for many Indigenous people. We honor and respect the history, languages, ceremonies, and culture of the First Nations, Métis, and Inuit who call this territory home. Your facilitator for today is the extremely talented Heiko Ryll. Heiko's been working in the creative community for the past 2 decades as a photographer, designer, entrepreneur, educator, and mentor. Heiko has been working as a professional photographer for the past decade, complementing a 20+ year career in the creative arts. Before relocating to the Okanagan region in the summer of 2020, he taught and developed various creative and technical courses for all major post-secondary schools in Edmonton, including the U of A, NAIT, the public and Catholic school boards, as well as MacEwan, where he's been teaching a number of photography and business courses for the School of Continuing Ed. He eagerly adapted to online delivery over this past year and has successfully developed and delivered over 17 online courses so far. So welcome everyone. I'll hand it over to Heiko to get started here. Thank you very much for joining us.
Perfect. Thanks, Sean. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for taking part in this. I'm always excited to share what we've been able to create and to also acknowledge the fact of what an incredible institution MacEwan is to allow instructors like myself and all my colleagues to be able to create courses that bring value and bring positivity to people specifically at this time. One of the cool things about this online delivery is that you get the session's recorded then, and you will get a link to this session as well. So if there is something that you would like to go over again, there will be a little bit of instruction. I'll give you some takeaways that you guys will be able to take with you after. So and then there will also be time for questions at the end. I'll make sure that I'm going to leave a little bit of time. So please type your questions into the chat, and then Sean will facilitate that for us. And then I'll be able to address your questions as much as possible. So keep them coming. So in today's session, I kind of wanted to change it up a little bit, and I'm going to answer some questions here. And these are the most common questions that I get whenever I tell people that I teach these classes. And we'll go through each one of these one at a time, and just so you know. And then as you get more questions, just please ask. So who am I? I've one of those, those creative artsy kids that grew up with a lot of freedom. My mother gave me a lot of creative freedom and taught me very young age that if you're going to do something, you do it 150%. So I've always kind of been involved in the arts, and about 20 plus years ago, I was a graduate of NAIT, and I got into the design and the web design world, and I did that for many years until I left and started snowboard coaching. Weird transition. But while I was snowboard coaching, the club bought me a camera. And at no time in my career did I ever think that I wanted to actually get into doing photography. But I started taking pictures of the kids, specifically the athletes that I was working with, to help them assess their tricks and their style and their forms and stuff like that. But then I started getting more creative with it, and people started noticing that, and they started asking me to take more photographs and more photographs. And then people were saying like, hey, we got $100. Can you come out and take some photographs? We got a little bit of money. And it just snowballed after that over the past decade, to the point where I still have a studio that I manage in Edmonton called The Workstat, which is a creative community. And a place for creatives to rent as well. And like Sean said, I live strange twist of fate. I live now in a small town called Summerland, British Columbia. So I spend a lot of times out in the mountains and on the lake. This is the photograph, though, that changed me. And this was a photograph at my wife's cousin's wedding, where I was just positioned behind the bride and groom, or the bride's parents. And I just saw this photograph and I just took it. And afterwards, a very sad twist of fate, but very shortly after, the mother passed away. And this is when I really realized the power of what this little black box and a camera gives us. And I always come back to this, and I always come back to this photograph when things get a little heavy with me, and I kind of think, do I want to continue doing this? Am I good enough to do this type of work? And I just look at this and go, just how powerful this image actually was. Technically, yeah, we can pick it apart if we need to, but it's aesthetically and the emotion and the feeling, it just takes me back to that moment, and just the proud parents who've been together for a long time, watching their daughter and their new son-in-law partake in their life together. So what we do is very powerful. Don't let anybody ever discount that to you. Some people just don't understand it, and it's okay if they don't understand. Somebody else will, and we just need to find those people and connect with those people. I quickly fell into this world of studio photography, where I taught myself studio lighting, and I had the honor to be able to work with some of the top hairstylists in actually the world. And I was worked on collections for the North American Hair Awards and the Canadian Hair Awards. They're both finalists and winners for them. And then that led to working within my first year of photography, being flown out to Toronto to work with Revlon Professional and American Crew, right? And doing some work with them, which was kind of mind-blowing, because I still didn't really know what I was doing. I just kind of was like, I think that looks good if I do this, and looks good if I do that, and it just kind of fell into play. And I was very honored to be able to partake in that, and I still do partake in some studio work when I get a chance to. Over this past year, obviously things have changed, but I still was able. There was a small window where we shot a collection last year during the summer before I moved over to Summerland, and I'm looking forward to continuing this type of work. Hopefully this summer with some stylists that I work with. I grew up also being a musician, and I've had the honor of being able to photograph some of the largest bands and some of the largest venues, hence Commonwealth Stadium, Rogers Place, shot at every major performance venue in the city, as well as the smallest. And these photos here at the bottom were shot at a small club called the Wonder Barn. I don't know if anybody remembers it, but it had, one green light and red walls, and the floor stuck when you walked on it, and it was really gross, but I cut my teeth there and was able to get some of my favorite actual music photographs doing that and shooting those small venues. So when I get the opportunity to photograph at larger venues, I'm able to connect. This picture with James Hetfield's an awesome one, because that's one where we both connected and he gave me the nod, and I'll always remember that. And then I was also honored to photograph Chris Cornell's last concert here, which was one of the most powerful things I've ever witnessed, and incredible honor to be having these photographs in my collection, in my portfolio. I also have done some wedding stuff, so shh, don't tell anybody. And I do some family and kid photos as well. So I do some more traditional type work. Majority of my work when I was living in Edmonton, though, was throughout the event season, and I was an event photographer. So I would work, one of my biggest clients is Taste of Edmonton, and I'll work to create their marketing imagery as well as document their festival. And we're still in the process of planning, so their fingers are crossed that things are going to happen and bring me back to Edmonton this year. I also work with some large organizations in the States, as well as some smaller events and stuff around, and like the conservation officer service and stuff. I both do their graduations and things like that. So I have my fingers in a little bit of everything. And then recently, since I moved out to the Okanagan, I'm now doing more nature work, where I started doing landscape, and now I've caught the wildlife bug, and every morning that's where you're going to catch me, is out and about trying to catch the bears, the cougars, and the wolves, to see if I can get some interesting photographs. Usually it's just birds, but sometimes I get lucky with stuff. So what classes does MacEwan offer? Before I get into that, this is how I break down my whole teaching philosophy when it comes to teaching photography, is that there's three areas. There's the technical, the vision, and the access. In the technical, that's where we start to deal with the things like what the camera is, things that deal with exposure, lenses, focusing, metering, those very technical areas, as well as starting to understand what light does. And we need to understand this area. This area is way more important than this area, because when we start to understand how light works, then we will know how the camera is going to interpret that, and we'll know how to adjust the settings accordingly, as opposed to just formulas. I don't want to just give you those specific formulas. I want to give you all the little elements that make it up, so now we can make the proper decisions that we need. And I stick with the philosophy on the technical side called the pathway of light, that everything starts with the scene luminance. And as the amount of light that we have is going to dictate every step of the process, until that image is put out to print or put out to the internet, wherever we're going to distribute it. Now, when it comes to the content that's inside of the photograph, this comes into what I call the point of view. And our point of view is everybody has their own, and that's why there's room in this world and in this industry for everybody, because everybody's going to see the world at a different angle, in a different way. So when we break that down and think about what makes up the point of view, it all starts with an interest. So what are we very interested in? And then we need to have intent. We need to go out and shoot with intention. Once we have intention, we know what we're looking, and then we can start to bring those types of elements in front of us, and we'll become hyper aware of us. It's incredible what we're able to do when just understanding the brain and how the brain works in creative pursuits, is that the more constraints and the more intention we have, the more active it actually gets, and the more we get to a desirable result that we want. After we have our intention, we need to know what our subject is. And the subject ties into access, because we need to gain access to that subject. We need to understand who that subject is, and then we need to get the response back from that subject, be it whatever it is. It could be an idea, it could be a place, it could be a person, it could be a thing. It's dependent upon what your intention is. And then finally, there's the finish. And how do we process that photograph to get it out to the world? There's no such thing as a photo that comes straight from camera that's not processed. Every image is processed. So we're able to just take what the manufacturer gives us and put that out. That's one way, but we can also manipulate that. And that comes from the old traditional world of darkroom work. And now we work in the digital realm, pushing pixels around to get that final last little bit. Now, point of view is really important, because if you don't have this point of view, it just kind of becomes gimmicky. It's like if you go in and just buy somebody's presets for Lightroom because you think their photography is cool and you want to look like their photography. There's so much more that goes into that to get that final photograph, that it's not just buying a simple one-click application to be able to get wonderful photographs. We need to train ourselves how to see, most importantly, and then understand the technical side of things, have an intention, know what our subject is, and understand how to finish those photographs to get them out. So it's ingredients. I want to expose, and I do expose all my students to all the different ingredients that can make up a photograph and all the different areas. And then you can pick and choose what you want to make the recipes that you want. I don't want to just give you the formulas, because it's quicker for me to do that. There's less challenge to do that. But what happens is that you eventually hit a plateau and you don't know where to go after, because you don't have the foundation on why that recipe actually works. And we do some recipe stuff, but we include the ingredients, and we understand what ingredients make up that recipe and why they're interacting with each other to get that final result that we're after. So here's the classes. We have digital photo basics, where this is this is really geared towards people who are kind of brand new and just want to get up to speed on their camera. It's a like 7-hour-ish workshop. It's sometimes we run it in one day, but I think that in May we're going to run it over 2 days, just to kind of break it up a little bit. And it's going to go over the technical side of just getting ourselves up and running and understanding what the equipment is. And it's very important to read your manuals at that point as well. So if you haven't read your manual, step one, you want to take better photographs, read your camera manual. Everything is in there. Most people don't. Most people just keep it in the box and push it aside. Then in digital photography 1, we focus on the technical aspects. We talk about exposure. We talk about aperture, shutter speed. I actually expose you to the truth about what ISO actually is and how we use it, and not to be afraid of using ISO. And then we apply our intent to it. And through a series of lectures and exercises, it's just building ourselves through this intention to get to a final result that we want to get to. Digital photography 2 focuses still on intent, but now we start to bring in the subject and access into it all. And we're dealing with the different genres of photography. We start to explore still lifes, we explore landscapes, we explore portraiture, event coverage, anything that architecture is the last one that we had students that were interested in. So I've done all of those types of genre, and I've done them all. I've had clients in all of them, so I've done them all professionally. And then there's also a speed lighting class that's in there, and when I took this class over, I changed the direction that I wanted to take with it, because I wanted us to understand. I kind of split it up into 2 areas where we've got natural light and then we have artificial light. And we first start to understand what natural light is doing. And once you start to be able to read and know what's happening, what Mother Nature is giving us, then we'll know when is the proper time to include artificial light and how we include that artificial light in the 2 different ways that we do. Do we do it with contrast control, or do we do it with quality control? We also deal with subjects there as well. We start to get into headshot photography. So there's some skills that you learn where you're able to start to output and start to market yourself and start to make some money from your photography as well. If that's the direction that you want to go, you don't have to. And then the Lightroom course is about finishing. It's about post-processing. And we use Lightroom Classic. Sorry, it's like, I got to make sure to put that in. We do use Adobe Lightroom Classic. It's a tool, and the concepts that are explained in that tool transcend that specific tool. So regardless of what raw processor you actually are using, if it's Capture One or if it's that Nikon Capture as well, there's a few that are out there. They're on one as well. The concepts are still the same. So it's about workflow and understanding how to get those photographs after or out into the world. I also do 2 classes outside of the certificate, which is like starting your creative business, where we focus more on the act of freelancing, where it's not just geared towards photography, it's geared towards anything that you want to in the creative arts. And we also do a mobile photography workshop. And one that I didn't add here is we're offering it this summer. We offer Photoshop for photographers. So we take the Lightroom class and we ramp it up a little bit more. So what we're doing is we're seeing how Lightroom integrates in with Photoshop, but we're able to see the true power on what Photoshop can do to really finish those images, and the techniques that we can use to help speed up our workflow to get the pictures out, and also to elevate them even higher if that's the route that you want to go into, if you're interested in doing that. So geared specifically towards photographers. So we're not learning anything graphic designy about the tool. We're learning all the tools that are geared specifically for editing photographs in there. So there's also a independent projects class that my colleague Aspen teaches. That's a part of the certificate program as well. And I believe she also teaches a business for photographers one, because she's very much a wedding photographer, and she brings that knowledge into it. She's got a very awesome approach and a very different holistic approach to her photography. So we complement each other really, really well. As I'm very honored to have her as a colleague of mine. So who are these courses for? Therefore, I've had people who have just picked up their camera. We just had one gentleman who just finished. We just finished an actual like whole iteration of this last week, and he picked up his camera just before the photo basics, and he went through all of the classes, and his growth was incredible. And he's just so excited because he's seeing a new pathway to take his a way to maybe supplement his income that he's hoping for. I've had people who are just stay-at-home parents who don't have a lot of time and can't actually go to an in-person class, but can devote some time to themselves and help with their photography. And they have areas that they want to focus on and things that they want to do to keep themselves creating. We've had amateurs who want to just elevate their amateur status and just want to take their photography up a level. And we have people who want to take it into professional level, and they want to actually start to get into this realm. So it does encompass everybody, and I make sure that everything that I'm talking about in my classes hit all the points for everybody that's there. We just had a gentleman who's actually been doing photography for over 20 years and does it at an incredible high level. And he just took the whole series of classes because he just wanted to have a different, a way to think about his photography different, because he's been doing it for so long and he was kind of stuck in his ways. So we opened his eyes up to some stuff, and he opened my eyes up to some stuff as well. So it's a two-way relationship. I know that right now I'm talking to a little black camera and you guys are looking at a screen of me, but there's a lot of communication that I like to facilitate, and I like to get in the trenches with you. So when we're doing the exercises and stuff, we're doing the exercises together. These are not just fluff things these are things that I do to help keep myself sharp when I'm doing my stuff. So it's very, I bring a lot of passion, and I care a lot about this world. And I really think it's important for us for me to share my knowledge and to pass it along and help you guys, my students, develop their own way of seeing, as opposed to just saying, this is how you should shoot it. Go outside, set it to f8, ISO 100, shutter speed at 1/250th, go for it. You're going to get photos. Come on. It's stale. It's static. It's too easy to do that. So I just gave you the thing, but let's start talking about what happens when we change some of those settings. Where does noise actually come from? Those types of things, and how we can push and challenge each other for it. So the classes are delivered in live sessions are twice a week. I used to keep my lectures shorter, but now what I've done is I've broken it up and mixed in like exercises throughout, and there's breakout discussions and stuff that I set the students up into groups. So it's about community. One of the things that I got feedback from my students on is they wanted to build more community with it. So one of the things we've done and recently implemented is things called breakout rooms, where I put everybody into small little groups and give them little scenario challenges, and they discuss it amongst themselves how they would tackle those scenarios, and they start to build these relationships. So the last class now has their own private Facebook group, and they're staying in touch with each other, so they were able to build that community, which is incredible. My curriculums are living, and what that means is that there is a foundational path that we take, but it's not set in stone. It's set in sand, and we're able to push it and pull it and move it, and we can run water through, and it just flows. We're depending on what my students want. And there's, I make sure that I do a pre-course survey. So before you take any of my courses, there's a pre-course that asks you a series of questions. There's a mid-course survey to check in with you guys, how you're doing. And then there's a post-course survey. At the end of every class, there's always time to talk and discuss, and we talk about everything. We've talked about everything from the proper focal length to how do I get my stars to be round in astrophotography to RuPaul's Drag Race, what happened last week. So it's not just all about photography, it's just about connection. And and finally, the last thing is that live sessions are recorded, and I think that's one of the best things about this. The positives about online learning is when you take an in-person class, you can't record the class and take it home with you. You've got to keep up with the notes. You've got the note pack, and then you got to try to remember what's happened. This way, you've got the live lectures you can download about a half hour after the lecture is done. You have it, you keep it, you've got it forever. Specifically when it gets into the heavy technical stuff, a lot of students like to review that after so they can listen and not try to worry about keeping up with notes and then develop questions for the period after. Or in the Lightroom class, what we just did was I'm able to just do demos and not have the students try to keep up with me. They're just watching me do the demo, and then they can download the video. And if they want to do the same steps that I'm doing, they can follow along with it at their pace. Can't do that other places. So it's pretty cool. It's pretty awesome. There's some positives that come out here. So how do I register? You, through their website, through the School of Continuing Education, is a place that you can register, and their team is very incredible. Sean and his team are there to answer any questions. I'm here. You've got my emails. You can send my stuff out. If I don't know it, I get them involved with it, and they help you out to make sure that it's a smooth as possible process. We want to build that whole, we want to have that great experience all the way from start to finish when you're going through. So you can look that up on the School of Continuing Ed, and that'll be a link that'll be sent out as well with the webinar. There's a pretty picture just to break it up. Oh, so you're not looking at the Instagram. This is in Bali. This is when we were able to travel, and this is one of the last places I was able to travel. So capturing a nice sunrise over the volcano. What equipment do you need? Anything that has a photosensitive surface and a lens that can capture light is what it comes down to. There's a lot of people get very hung up on, do I need to have a really good camera? Do I need to have do I need to have a full frame? Do I need to have a mirrorless? What kind of camera do I need to have? Do I need to have a fast lens, a slow lens? What do I need to have? What do you have right now? Look at what you have right now, and that's the best thing that you can use. If you're looking at actually going out and purchasing a camera, what I always recommend is if you get an opportunity, go to a camera store. If you're in Edmonton, go to VizTech or McVeigh Camera. If you're in Calgary, go to the camera store or VizTech there. And the staff is really awesome, and they'll let you hold the camera. You want to hold a camera. You want something that you're going to enjoy holding in your hand and that you're going to carry around with you. If you have any specific technical type of requirements that you need, those are the things that you can reach out and ask me about, and I can help guide you on that. But ideally, you just need a camera that has an interchangeable lens. So anything that's a DSLR or a mirrorless, that's the newer type of camera that's out there. And you can have a kit lens, you can have a prime lens, you can have a zoom lens. It's lens independent. We focus more on the aspect of training ourselves how to see, and then we transcend the equipment to understand that this is only a tool. And my life is not dependent upon what it says here. I couldn't care less about it. I just want to make sure that I have this, so when I go out, I can take the pictures that I want to take. And sometimes I use this, And this does a wonderful job as well with it. So in terms of the classes, an interchangeable lens camera like DSLR or mirrorless. If you want to take the speed lighting class, an on-camera speed light that can go into TTL, and that'll be something that I can help you with picking out. And a 5-in-1 reflector is an awesome tool, but that's it. You don't need anything else on top of that. You just need your own 2 feet and your willingness to learn. One of my colleagues said something really great about these classes, about continuing ed classes. They shouldn't be stressful. We're not doing this for marks, we're not doing this for grades, we're doing this is you time. So this is the time that you want to take to better yourself. So that's why I give the exercises, but there's no like it has to be done before the next class. I recommend that it's done so you can continue on, because everything builds on top of each other, but life sometimes gets in the way, and sometimes you just can't, and that's okay. It's all about making sure that you're getting what you need out of it, and that's where the communication is facilitated between both of us when we're dealing with these classes. So the big thing is learning how to see. We need to stop looking and we need to start seeing. Okay, but it's a process. So we need to utilize specific exercises that teach us how to look a specific way to allow our brain to teach ourselves how to see. And this is no better place to this happen than when you're photographing in nature, because animals are all around you, and it's incredible the connection that you can get with them, but they're only going to let you see them if they want it. So when we're out and about in the bushes, sometimes we just see the twigs. And then we may hear a little sound, and then we move a little bit, and then we may catch something a little bit different that's going to happen. And we start to get a connection that's going to happen. And then we can move ourselves into a proper position to be able to get a photograph that we want to. And it's not about trying to understand what deers do. It was the way that I'm able to see more wildlife and access more wildlife is to learn what the birds are doing and learning how to listen to birds, because birds will tell you. I'm able to walk up on deers, and it's an incredible thing to be able to get close to them and have these connections with them. And as well as I've had an encounter with a bear, a very close encounter with a bear. I've had an encounter with a cougar, scary type things, but that's a whole other discussion. Well, I'm getting off topic with it. We learn how to see. If you can start to learn how to see what's actually happening in front of you, then you're going to know what to do with your camera and get the photographs that are going to make you happy. Okay. So finally, okay, Smarty Pants. So a lot of people say that's all good and well, and you're talking about great classes and stuff like that, but how can I start taking better photographs today? Well, here you go. Remember, I spoke a little bit about the pathway of light. Here is the pathway of light. It starts with what's called scene luminance, and that's the amount of light that's in our environment. Are we outdoors? Are we indoors? How do we judge how much light we have? That light is now going to dictate some initial settings that we have. Do we need to amplify our ISO, make our sensor a little more sensitive to light because of what the nature of what we're shooting? Or can we keep it at its base ISO, where it's going to give us the widest dynamic range, which is going to give us the best quality? Spoiler alert, if you're concerned about digital noise and how to get rid of it, it's never going to happen. The digital noise is always there. There's noise that is in every image all the time. So there's no way that you can get absolutely rid of the noise. And the reason why is because noise is all around us. The world that we live in, if we look out, and if you look out your window right now and you start seeing things in the distance, what happens to them? They start to get faded away. The reason they're faded away is because there's noise in the way. There's what's called atmospheric diffusion. There's little particles of dust, and there's little particles of moisture and stuff in the air that's getting in the way, that's letting us know that there is depth. When we listen to an LP, an old record, those black things that you put on the record player and you put the needle down, what's the first thing you hear? You hear that noise, that dust and little imperfections, and that's what starts to bring life into our images. When we're shooting stuff on film and we're printing it on paper, you purchased your film and your paper based upon the grain pattern that you would have because you wanted it. It was celebrated, your grain. Now, it's not that saying that you can just create a very noisy image and it's okay. It's about making sure that the noise is not distracting, and it should supplement and complement your photograph. And there's ways that we can do that. Now, how much light is there? First question that we ask. Then the light strikes our subject, and based upon the type of surface that our subject has, the light is reflected then into the camera. And the first area that affects what's called exposure is what's called the aperture. And the aperture is controlling the amount of light, but it also controls the look, because it determines how much light is coming in, but how much depth of field. What's our range of focus that we have? Do we have very shallow focus, or do we have a deep range of focus? How much do we want to have in focus? That's what's controlled by the aperture. That's something that post-processing can't really help us with. We can do some stuff with it, but it becomes very fake looking. So the aperture is something that can't really be adjusted in post. Next is shutter speed. And shutter is how we want to control the motion. Do we want to freeze the motion, or do we want to have a little bit of motion blur? And that's something that we can actually control in post as well if we need to. There's tools to make things sharper, but there's also tools to make things blurrier. And sometimes a blurry image is okay. It's not always about the sharpest image. It's about acceptably sharp, making sure that it's getting the point across that you want on your intent and your subject and your finishing. And then finally, we have the sensor. And the sensor is the photosensitive surface that is sensitive to light, that changes those light particles into electronic signal and packages them all up into something called a pixel, and then puts them in a grid, and it puts them all together in a grid pattern based upon the amount of pixels that you have, and you have yourself an image that you're going to, that you can output. This is the key. Understanding this and learning to see the light is going to dictate everything that we do on the camera when we're working with the camera. Now, a couple terms to become familiar with. There's contrast, which means difference, and there's affinity, which means similarity. So contrast is where the difference is, and the more difference there is in a specific area, the more attention is going to be drawn there. Affinity now has similarity, and with similarity, that means that things are going to be a little bit flatter. So when we look at the image on the left here, which is what's called a high contrast image, because we have whites and we have blacks. We have the full tonal range that's occurring here. On the image on the right, we have what's called affinity. It's an affinity image because there's no blacks and there's no whites. There's all shades of gray. So it's kind of compressed in the values that we're able to utilize. A contrasty image has a little bit more dynamics to it. An affinity image is softer and more atmospheric. One is not better than the other. It's just understanding the control of this. Because of the strongest contrast we can have is when we put a black next to a white. You can't get any stronger contrast than that. So when there's a black next to a white, that's where our eye is going to go. That triggers off a part of our brain called the lizard brain, which we don't have control over. It's a fight or flight complex, and that's what draws ourselves. This is the number one way that photographs go wrong. Okay, is the fact that you're looking at your subject, but you're not looking at what's going on around your subject, and you have high point of contrast somewhere else in your subject that's going to now detract the attention away from the photograph. We've all taken photographs where you see something like, oh, this is so mad, this is so awesome, and you take the picture, and then you come home and you go, what? This is nothing like what I saw out there. Because we're not in tune with we're not in tune yet how the camera sees, and we haven't taught ourselves how to see yet to be able to capture what we're actually seeing on the camera, right? Because the eye only has a very small area of focus. It has I think it's like a 0.01 millimeter area of focus is actually the only part that's in focus when we're looking. And a camera, we can have the whole thing is sharp from edge to edge, or in focus from edge to edge, and that's where the distractions start to come into play. So we have to learn some stuff. Now, that ties in with composition, and composition is the definition. This is not something I made up. This is pulled straight out of like Webster's dictionary. It's the nature of something's ingredients, the way in which a whole or mixture is made up. It's about the whole. It's not subject placement. So you may have heard of something called the rule of thirds. The rule of thirds, people mistake it as a compositional technique. It is not a compositional technique, okay? It is where you position your subject. Composition is about the whole. So we position our subject, but then we need to be very we need to be very, aware of what's happening around the subject and how the subject actually interacts with its environment. So here's a quick lesson for you. There's only two places you can put your subject: in the center or off center. So here or 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 here. There you go. Your subject placement experts right now. So remember that the use of space making up the whole is what composition is. Now with the rule of thirds, now the rule of thirds is a great place to think about where am I going to place my subject. So the way the rule of thirds states is that you divide your image plane up into thirds horizontally and vertically, and where the lines intersect is where you place a subject. Hence they even say it in there, place their subject, to make it a pleasing composition. No. Because if I place my subject on one of these intersection points, but I got a big area of black and white in the bottom corner, where's our eye going to go? To the bottom corner. So there's a plateau that you hit very quickly when you're using something like that, because it's a technique to place our subject. And then what we need to do is we need to start to look around the frame to see what's happening and and photography is a subtractive process. So what that means is we're looking at things to remove, as opposed to painting or drawing, which is an additive process because you're using a device to leave a mark on a surface. Photography is not that. We have to be aware of what don't we want to have in that's going to be distracting in our types of compositions. So the concept that I focus on is a concept called Gestalt. It's a very powerful German word, Gestalt. And there's some laws, it's weird that the Germans that come into play, that it's all about the whole. And the Gestalt is about the whole is more important than the sum of the parts. So it's how does everything interact with each other? And so let me skip over this one. This is where I want to come into the concept to give you. That's the figure to ground relationship. And this is possibly the most powerful technique that you can use to improve your photographs right now. It is the relationship of your subject to the background, okay? And it reads like this. We've got the screen that's in front of you right now. Is that screen light gray or is that screen dark gray? Just take a second to think. Is it light or is it dark? Now, we add an element inside of that. Is the gray light gray or is it dark gray? Has it changed? Now, is it light gray or is it dark gray? We change the subject. Watch this now. Is it light gray or is it dark gray? And the strongest point of contrast is where? In our subject, in the center of the screen, right? So, figure to ground, the relationship of the subject with the background. It's a light subject on a dark background or a dark subject on a light background. Now, this is not something that's specific to photography. The Gestalt principles come from traditional design and come from traditional painting. And that's where we really learn composition. So if you want to be a student of composition, don't just look at photographers. You've got to look at painters. You've got to look at masters that are able to create those compositions and what they're doing when they're placing their subjects and how their subjects relate with their background. And this is where this concept comes into play. So it's very simple, light on dark or dark on light. So here, Memphis, Tennessee, on Beale Street, Elvis statue, right? So you know exactly where you're looking when you're looking at this, because you've got the light on dark, you've got the strongest point of contrast in the actual subject. But what happens if we're not able to get into this position and we're somewhere else and we have another option? Well, now I can go dark on light. Ooh, boom. Always thinking about the way that the subject is relating with everything else around it in that frame so that nothing is going to distract away from my specific subject. So light subject on dark background, dark subject on light background these concepts are so simple by definition, and we kind of look and go, yeah, of course it is, right? Like, yeah, of course it's a lot, we're seeing this and we're seeing the notional space and we're understanding, we're grounding with the dot on the bottom and stuff. And I understand all this stuff, but now we have to go and do it. And the great thing about photography is the fact that we can build our visual library very quickly, faster than a traditional artist can, because it takes them longer to create their images with making marks on paper or putting paint to canvas. We're able to take hundreds, thousands of photographs every day if we want to be able to teach ourselves these types of concepts and to start to build that library. Just by looking at photographs is not going to build it. You actually have to do the act of taking that photograph. There's something else that goes on. You're firing off more parts of your brain, and you're actually creating, there's a connection that happens. And you may have experienced this already if you're not new to photography, you've been doing this for a while, is that you can take a look at any photograph that you've ever taken and remember the exact moment that you took it. That exact 1/2000th of a second at f4 at ISO 640, you just remember exactly what you did on that specific day, on that specific moment when you captured it. And you'll do that with the hundreds of photographs that you capture throughout your day, your week, your career, whichever direction that you want to go. So the highest contrast is in the subject. So always make sure that that's what we're looking for, is making sure what's happening. So when I know my subject is, I center my subject, or I place them off center, wherever I want to place them. And then I start to look around your frame. Because once you have your subject, it takes care, it's done. It's all this other stuff that ruins this specific image. It's not your subject that ruins the image ever. It's the other stuff that ruins the image. So put the highest contrast in the subject, and then get your background first. Get there a little bit sooner. Set up a little bit and know exactly where you want to place your subject in with the background, and know how they're interplaying with it. So this is the exercise. You want to start making better photographs. Today, I challenge you this for people who have some time to do this. It doesn't take long. Go out and take 10 photographs of a light subject on a dark background, and just do those. Don't jump back and forth, stick with one specific. Then take 10 photographs of a dark subject on a light background. Start to take note of it. You're going to take obvious photographs at the start and very representational photographs at the start, which means that you're going to be putting the street signs like in the sky. So you're going to get yourself a little lower, and you're going to take those. You need to take those photographs. And then what's going to happen once you continue to do these exercises is that you start to see these other elements start to emerge in your photographs, and you start to see things a little bit different. Ooh. Now we're getting into that transcending the camera. We're getting into just understanding, we're developing our brain and teaching our eyes how to work the way that we want them to work. So ask yourself these questions every time before you press the shutter. What's the subject? What is the background? What type of light is on the subject? And why am I taking this photograph? If we take a moment just to do that before we snap, and I'm with a lot of people and a lot of friends and stuff that just pick their camera up and they'll go, hey, and they're like, oh, those photos suck, right? Because you're not taking the time to understand what it is that you're actually photographing. That's going to be your step into getting to another level on top of it. So look at that. I finished perfect, Sean. This is me. That's my favorite trail. That's my favorite mountain. You can see more of my work on my website. You can read my stuff. You can hear my podcast. I got a podcast there. I've got a YouTube channel too. I got YouTube stuff up, and I've got my Instagram. That's where I'm probably most active, very sporadic, but I am usually most stories. And then there's my email. So you can send me an email anytime you want to with any types of questions that you have. We may not have been personally introduced, me and you, but just let me know that you're a part of this, or you're interested in this, and you're a photographer and you want some advice, or you just want somebody to look at something to critique. Oh, that's another thing that I didn't touch on in the classes. At the beginning of every class, we do a critique, and we do a critique based upon the specific topic that we're focused on the previous class and building on to the next topic of the current class. So you're able to get your photographs seen, if you're comfortable with it, in front of other students, and we go through and we break down the photograph on what's working and what's not working, and then how we can make that better, how we would approach it a little bit differently. And that's growth, and I think that's a very powerful thing, and that came from direct feedback from students that they wanted to do more of, and we've integrated it, so it's a very common thing that we do all the time. So that leaves us with a few moments for questions. So Sean, I don't know if there is any questions out there.
No questions yet, but everyone, please feel free to throw the questions in the chat there if you have any questions for Heiko, and we'll go through them.
Oh, there's no questions. Don't be shy. There's no such thing as a silly question. There's no silly questions. There's just questions for you. So I don't know. Ooh. This is that weird part of online teaching where it's like the eerie, awkward silence where I can't keep my mouth shut and I start rambling on and talking nonsense. If anybody has any questions about the actual class, the classes, which class to take. Somebody said they jumped on a bit late. What is this course about? This is about the photography certificate program at MacEwan University, where we talked about all the different classes that make up the photography certificate, who this program is for, and how it's run. And then we go into a little bit of my philosophy, and we give you a little bit of technique, something that you can start to apply to yourself right now, that will definitely make an impact on your photographs. So there you go. I answered the one.
There's a question in the chat here from Michelle. Can you see the chat, Heiko?
The do photographers frown upon photographers using automatic focus versus manual? That one?
Yeah. Let's go.
Yep. So that question right there is, if somebody does frown upon it, you don't want to be around those people. It doesn't matter if you're using automatic or if you're using manual. It doesn't matter if you're using an automatic mode in your camera, like for exposure mode, or a semi-automatic mode, shutter priority, aperture priority, or manual settings. Because there's somewhere along the lines, there's somewhere out there, somebody said that to be a high-level photographer, you need to only shoot in manual. That is not the case. You need to understand what every single aspect of your camera is capable of doing to be able to capture the image that is required at the specific moment that you need to capture it. So if you're moving from a bright scenario to a dark scenario very quickly and you're going in and out like you're shooting at a reception of a wedding, if you're shooting in manual, you're going to miss shots. I'm sorry, you are going to miss shots. Nobody is that fast with turning all their dials and adjusting their ISO. So you jump into a semi-automatic mode so you're able to get more keepers and then be able to produce properly to your client. That's the whole goal at the end of the day. So it doesn't matter what mode. I used to be very stuck on shooting. I got to shoot in manual mode. And that's specifically when I was shooting music. Like, oh, because all the music guys say you got to shoot in manual mode. So I got to shoot in manual mode. So I got all my settings and stuff on my dials. And I'm like, oh, I got to shoot in manual mode. I got to shoot in manual mode. And then I started noticing I was missing shots. And then one time I was shooting a concert and I went, who cares? Nobody's ever asked me what mode I shot my photo in. They just care about the photo that's done. So jump it into an aperture priority or jump into auto ISO mode, and I'm able to get more keepers that are happening, and nobody ever asks questions or asks that. So as long you use what you need to use to get the final result that's happening. If you're finding that you're missing shots, maybe it's time that you get out of that specific manual mode and jump into different automatic modes or semi-automatic modes to help you out. The way that I shoot most of my nature photos, because it's so quick, I don't have a lot of time to think. I will lock down my shutter speed to where I need it to be, and I'll keep my aperture where I know my lens is going to be sharpest, and then I turn my ISO onto auto ISO, so that's the variable that's going to change. And then if I have a little bit of time and I can start to slow down after I capture that initial photograph, then I can start to dial in settings after, but I'll make sure that I capture a photograph first, then I'll start to dial in some stuff with it. And I'll use shutter priority if I'm wanting to capture birds in flight. I'll use aperture priority if I want to capture things in a lower light type mode and I want to lock down what my ISO is. So I use them all interchangeably. When I did weddings, I would shoot. Sometimes I would shoot program mode. And I learned that from another very high-end wedding photographer who said that's the fastest way to get those shots. And then because you have a proper capture of image, and you'll know what you can do with it in post-production. That's why understanding your finishing is very important. Is a certificate full-time study that can be done part-time? It is all part-time. And it can be done in the evenings. That's the time that it runs. So yes, Jesse, that is the way that you can you take the course. Is that this is continuing education, so you don't have to take it full time during the day. It's evening classes. It usually runs Tuesdays and Thursdays, sometimes Mondays and Wednesdays, depending on where we are in the schedule. And you have about 2 sessions per week that you go. Each session is about 3 to 3.5 hours, depending on what we're covering. And they're all recorded, and you're able to take them home with you. And I supply notes and resources and everything that you need to be able to get to where you want to be, where you need to get to, not where I think you need to be, where you want to get to. Yes, there is, Heidi. There is a mobile photography class, and it ran last time, and let me tell you, it was a gas. It's just like a workshop. So we just kind of split it off up over, I think it's a couple of days that we do it now. It's over 2 classes, and we cover concepts still about learning to see, but we look at the different tools and how we can capture using the phone, and then process using the phone to get some stuff out. That's used by people who are in like doing social media stuff for companies, or just don't want to lug around one of these. They just want to lug around one of these, and you can get some really cool photographs and stuff with this stuff as well. So yes, there is. It is called Mobile Photography Workshop, and I believe it's being offered. I don't know the actual dates, but just check the School of Continuing Ed website, and that will give you your answers to that.
We have some questions coming through just in the chat here, Heiko. So
Okay.
I can read through. There's some questions about lenses, picking lenses you would like to have in your inventory. I currently have a 18 to 55 mil and a 75 to 300 mil.
Okay. Wonder if I can see. Can I see those? Oh, there it is. Maybe I can see this. Oh, cool. Let me see. Thank you for hosting the presentation. Oh, sorry. Okay. Sorry, I just wanted to reiterate that. Picking lenses, would you like to have? I currently have an 1855 and a 75. That's a great focal range. You're going from super wide angle to a telephoto. So it just kind of depends on what it is that you're going to be shooting, Michelle. If you're shooting outside, that's where aperture doesn't become as important. Like, you can have a variable aperture lens, like a 3.5 to a 5.6 type thing, because you're shooting in a lot of light anyway. You're able to compensate for that. There's enough light that's out there. But if you're shooting in low light environments, like inside and stuff a lot, you may want to go with the prime lens. Like a very common prime lens that people have in their bags is what's called the Nifty 50. And you can get a 50 mil or a 35 mil, 1.8. So it lets in a lot of light, and they're only a couple $100. So they're great lenses. Like I had a Nifty 50 or 1.8, and I sold it to buy the Pro version, the 1.4, and I liked my 1.8 better. I'll be honest with you. There's a little bit imperfections and stuff in them, and it's awesome. I'm just starting. A friend gave me a camera, so I don't know yet what to ask. Okay, perfect. When I was shooting 35 millimeter film and taking snowscapes, I was taught to open the aperture. Yeah, well, you can open the aperture, you can slow the shutter speed down depending on what you're doing, but you need to overexpose your image when you're shooting snow. So yes, because the meter inside your camera wants to make everything gray. So if you're shooting something that's white, like snowscape, it's going to want to make it gray. That's what's going to tell you that's going to be the optimal exposure. So you push your exposure a little bit by using what's called your exposure compensation, or adjusting your aperture open, or your shutter speed slower, or your ISO more sensitive and amplify it to kind of overexpose it by 1/3 to a full stop, depending how bright it is out there, to get that white to be white. Same thing goes for black. If you're shooting something that's very black, the camera's going to want to make it gray, so you're going to have to underexpose it. So you have to do the opposite with that. So Heidi, yes, thanks for your time. Okay, perfect, Dale. Which lenses do you recommend everyone have or use? It all comes down to the type of shooting that you want to do. Start with your understanding your kit lens that you get with your camera. Usually it's an 18 to 55. So that's going from a super wide angle to a medium telephoto. And then you're going to start to decide what it is that you like to shoot. And then it's going to dictate your actual choices for your types of equipment that you want to select. So there's no blanket answer that says you need to have these lenses, because if you're going to be somebody like, if I'm shooting my music photography, I need to have what are called fast lenses, which means the aperture goes really low, which means that the price goes very high, and to allow me to get the quality that I need to send it to publication when I was doing the work that when publications were running still. So it's going to be use what you have and use it until the point where you know you need to have more. I never thought in the world I would want to have a lens that was this big, but because of the nature of what I'm shooting right now, I need to have that, and that's allowing me to get the photographs that I need. Yes, the courses, you know what, Margaret, we were just talking about that. I think online courses are here to stay. And I was talking about that with a colleague of mine as well. I love the fact that it's a different way of teaching, and there is a connection that we're building with it. So it's never going to go away. We're going to keep it going as forever from now on. It's a new way of doing things. There will be in-person class again, but they'll complement each other. Yeah, there may be some classes that are going to be added, Miss Amanda, and you know, there's the Photoshop for photographers that's coming up, and you know, there was maybe a talk of like a video for photographers class as well, because I do some video stuff. So feedback from you guys is very important on what you'd like to see, and then we can develop that, and we can offer that as an offering. So you guys can dictate what's going to be offered in the future. Mainly outdoors, wildlife, and birds and landscape. Michelle, those lenses are going to be fine for you. You're going to be fine with that. Totally. For my bird photographs, I'm using the Sigma 150 to 600. This is the contemporary version. I didn't need to spend the extra $1,000 on the sport version because they take the same quality of photographs. I need that extra reach. It's a heavy lens. It's 5 pounds. So this is my exercise or my workout. So you need to have a tripod and stuff when you're shooting with this guy as well. Yeah, thanks, Sean. Sean mentioned you can find more details about the program and schedule at MacEwan.ca/photography. And we're at 12:59. And I think that's it.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Heiko, for this. This is wonderful. And thank you everyone that joined us. We'll send out a link with the recording after, and we hope to see you in some classes coming up here in the spring.
Yes, please. Come, enjoy, let's play. Let's make some photos, please. It's fun.